Have you ever watched your child do something they know they're not supposed to do, something you've talked about, some rule that they can repeat back to you word for word, and then when you ask them why they did it, they look at you and say, I don't know. As hard as it may be to believe, they're probably not being evasive. They're not covering. They may actually not know. So, I don't know why I did that is usually the most honest thing a child can say. Because knowing a rule and being able to follow a rule in that moment are two completely different developmental skills. And when we conflate them, we end up disciplining a child for something that discipline can't fix. Today we're going to talk about more effective ways than discipline to help our children succeed. If we haven't met yet, I'm Andrea Pollack. I'm a parenting educator and coach. I work with parents of autistic and neurodivergent children. I'm also the parent of an autistic adult who's now 27. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you know that a core belief of mine is that we as parents should prioritize support over discipline. And that applies most of the time to breaking rules our children know and understand. I'll get into the why more deeply, but first, this story illustrates the why perfectly. Not long ago, we took my son, remember I told you he's 27, we took him to an ice cream shop that he loves. I mean, who doesn't? One night, it was really crowded, and as he waited in line, his shoulder hit the light switch, and it briefly turned off. Not a big deal, it was an accident. But the next time we went in, he walked in and he reached out and flipped that switch off on purpose. We told him firmly it wasn't okay, and that it scares people when the lights suddenly go out. He understood, clearly. The next visit, before we even got out of the car, we reminded him, remember, we don't touch the light, it scares people. He nodded, he knew. And then we walked in, and you know what comes next, right? It was like that first incident awakened that 5-year-old we left behind who couldn't stop himself from flipping light switches. I'm sure some of you can relate. My very first instinct was to reach for a consequence. If you can't control yourself, no ice cream. That was the reflex. Immediate, before he even thought about it. And I want to highlight that for a second because I've been practicing this prioritized support approach for over 2 decades, and sometimes, even for me, those old conditioned reflexes still draw me back. Fortunately, I quickly thought about it and realized that this was one of those instances where he absolutely knew the rule but lacked the impulse control in the moment to stop himself from breaking it. That's what that behavior was showing me. And that matters because it suggests the approach for helping him succeed next time. Why? Because it was an impulse control problem, and his intention to follow the rule just could not override his impulse. Discipline was never going to help him grow that impulse control that he needed to succeed in that scenario. You cannot punish a child into a capacity they don't yet have. And this is a great example of someone not knowing why he broke the rule. It's not like he was thinking, gee, my impulse control skills are really lagging today. He didn't make a decision to break the rule, and he didn't know why he did it. So here's what we did. I set the consequence aside, not the boundary, and I'm going to come back to that because that part matters a lot, but the punishment. And instead, I asked myself a different question. What would help him to succeed here in this scenario? So the next time we went, we did a few things to support him. I reminded him of the rule as we walked in. I also had him clasp his hands together like this because I thought it would help him control his impulse. Because if he was inclined to reach for the switch with one of his hands, the other one was there to remind him not to. My husband also walked into the store in a way that blocked his access to the switch. With that support, he walked in, he went straight to the table and sat down. He did repeatedly keep saying, no touching the light. When we left, he was so stinking proud of himself. We did the same thing the next few times, but slowly faded the support, and he can now easily control his impulse when he walks in that door. We didn't discipline the behavior out of him, we supported the skill until it grew, and then the support wasn't needed anymore. When I shared this story with a group of parents, one mom asked me a great question. She asked, how did you get him to do that? My daughter wouldn't do that thing with her hands. And maybe that's true, at first. But here's what I found to be true. When we approach a child with, let me help you succeed, they tend to be much more willing to try than they would if we say, you have to do whatever. When I approached my son as someone who I believed wanted to succeed and just needed a little help getting there, and I did believe that. I believe most of our kids genuinely want to get it right. My son was then willing to accept the help. If we approach the issue as an attempt to control, that's when they resist it. When you problem solve together, you're greatly increasing the odds of success. So if your child wouldn't clasp their hands when asked, that's not the end of the story. It might mean that we need to provide a different kind of help. It also might mean there's more to understand about what's making that moment so hard for her. That's information. It's not proof that it can't work. I want to pause here for just a second. If you're enjoying this, if this content is landing with you, I'd be so grateful if you would consider subscribing and hitting the like button. This channel is for parents who are ready to find new ways to help their children, and I put out this kind of content every week. All right, back to it. Because the next part is where we discuss what you might be concerned about, what you might be thinking about. If you're concerned that offering this kind of support instead of discipline is in some way giving in or letting things slide, I want to set the record straight. In this case, I dropped the consequence, the no ice cream, because I decided that it wouldn't change the outcome. I hadn't set him up to succeed, but the boundary never moved. No touching the light. That was the boundary. That stayed exactly where it was the entire time. I wasn't going to tolerate him going in time after time and turning off the light. That was a boundary. What changed wasn't the expectation. What changed was that I took responsibility for helping him meet it instead of just demanding he meet it alone. We hold the boundary and we support the child to grow into it. Those two things work together. That's the whole point. And here's what I think would have happened if I had treated it as a discipline issue. His weak impulse control would have overridden what he knew was the right thing to do. We would have given the consequence and would have left without ice cream. His anxiety would have spiked all evening, and I know he would have felt really bad about himself. If after we offered support, he still could not resist the light switch, we would still have enforced the boundary. The answer would have been that we don't go back to that particular shop for now. Not as a punishment or as a consequence, and not to teach him a lesson, but to spare him from failing. To generalize the point, I suggest that when the gap between what a situation demands and what a child can do is too big, you change the situation. You don't keep marching them into failure, and you keep growing the skill somewhere where the stakes are lower, and you come back when the gap is lessened. That's not giving up the boundary. That's respecting the boundary enough not to set your child up to break it. Remember, our kids don't know why their skills fail sometimes. It wasn't that he wasn't trying hard enough. Had we disciplined him, the end of that incident would have left him thinking, I feel bad about what I did, but I don't think that bad feeling would have had any impact on his success next time. And that's the analysis in a nutshell. I set aside the consequence and put my energy into support instead. So here's what I'd leave you with. When your child does something they know they shouldn't, and they tell you, I don't know why I did that, believe them. Do your best to get curious instead of angry, and ask yourself, what is getting in the way of my child following this rule right here, right now? I'm not saying the issue never warrants discipline. Of course, kids misbehave. They're kids. Just take a moment to consider whether punishment would help them meet the expectation next time, or whether some additional support could better set them up for success. I hope this gives you some new ideas of how to handle this. I hope you'll consider liking and subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one.